Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 536, A Display of Women's Senior Li, Please Enter. The woman pushed the stone door open and respectfully invited Han Li inside. Han Li nodded and walked in without another word as the woman closely followed after him. The stone door then closed by itself and disappeared, returning the wall to its previous unremarkable appearance. After entering, Han Li saw a grey stone passageway that didn't appear very long based on the white light he saw faintly shining at the end. Han Li silently walked forward and made a turn at the end of the passage, suddenly facing a wide-open stone door. There was a gloomy middle-aged, mid-core formation cultivator standing outside the doorway. When he saw Han Li appear, he immediately smiled and said, "So your fellow Daoist Li. I am Xianxia, the master of the city. Welcome to my trade meeting. Nearly all of the fellow Taoists have already arrived." The Confucian scholar surnamed Yun was very courteous to Han Li. He then indifferently turned to the woman and said, "Young lady, when properly attend to Brother Li, make sure not to neglect him." Fellow Daoist Wen. There was no longer any doubt regarding the woman's identity. She was Wen Qiong's daughter, the exquisite sound sect's Wen Siue 1. Wen Qiong was a qi condensation cultivator that met Han Li at Stalwart Star Island. Han Li met him once again many years later along with his daughter in chapter 430. Just what had happened for her to appear at this place? It had caused Han Li no small amount of amazement. Naturally, since he had used the appearance exchange arts, the woman was unable to recognize him. When Wen Siue heard him, her flowery expression changed and she hastily acknowledged him. Although Han Li didn't turn around, he could faintly perceive that Wen Siue was very fearful of Yun Qianxiao. A strange expression flickered within Han Li's eyes, but he merely smiled and casually said a few words of formality before entering. The door led to a large square hall with a huge round table at its center. The table had over a dozen remarkably wide armchairs surrounding it. Most of the chairs were already occupied by other cultivators. But when Han Li clearly saw the circumstances in the room, he wore a baffled expression. Apart from two female core formation cultivators that were sitting alone, the male core formation cultivators were each nestled together with a gorgeous and alluring female cultivator. These female cultivators were either at peak qi condensation or early foundation establishment, and each of them were all young exceptional beauties. While Han Li looked at this in a daze, he suddenly smelled a sweet fragrance, and a soft, trembling body stood close by his side. Han Li's body tensed up and he slowly turned around to see a stiff, beautiful face. Wen Siue had taken the initiative to draw closer to him, allowing him to catch a whiff of her intoxicating scent. Han Li frowned, but he didn't push away the woman in an act of false sophistry. Instead, he again glanced at the female cultivators at the male core formation cultivators' sides with a gaze of understanding. After some thought, he wrapped his arm around the woman's waist and headed towards an empty armchair before sitting down. Wen Siue did the same as the other female cultivators, and reluctantly sat alongside him while leaning into Han Li's chest. For the moment, Han Li's chest had the warm company of a beautiful woman. Just as Wen Siue silently pressed her stiffened body against Han Li relaxed the arm he had wrapped around her waist. Wen Siue was stunned for a moment. She then unconsciously glanced at Han with a trace of bewilderment. At that moment, Han Li was calmly examining the others in the room. The 8 other core formation cultivators had naturally gazed in Han Li's direction as well. Although they found Han Li's appearance strange, they didn't reveal it on their faces. Instead, most of the people looked at Han Li with a kind smile. Han Li's expression relaxed and he returned the gesture. A short moment later, 6 more core formation cultivators entered the hall, each with a young, beautiful female cultivator at their side. Han Li watched this with an ordinary expression, but his heart felt amazement. Yun Qianxiao must have possessed significant skill to have found so many young and beautiful female cultivators. All of their cultivations weren't shallow either, but they were still at varying levels. Just as Han Li pondered this, Xianxia finally entered the hall with a graceful and elegant beauty wrapped around his arm. The woman was at late foundation establishment stage. Lady Fan. Han Li's heart was shaken upon seeing her. She is the exquisite sound sex envoy of the right, Lady Fan. It seems she has a somewhat deep relationship with the city master. This trade gathering should prove to be quite interesting. Despite his excitement and the expectations in his heart, Han Li was able to maintain his calm expression. Ah! Wen Xiue faintly trembled next to Han Li. A faint, painful groan left her dainty mouth. It sounded as if it contained flustered embarrassment. Han Li was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but puzzlingly glance at her. He found her face to be flushed red and bashful. He also discovered that his arm had unknowingly grasped onto her chest. He even felt his fingers pinching onto something stiff and round. This soft, overwhelming sensation shook the depths of Han Li's soul. He immediately withdrew his hand out of instinct. Wen Xiue's smooth, delicate neck was now flushed red. She hesitantly raised her head and gazed at Han Li's face with a trace of astonishment. A trace of discomfort faintly appeared on Han Li's face, but he pretended not to notice, relaxing the arm he had around her. Although he had never thought of himself as a man of honor, this woman could be considered an acquaintance, causing Han Li to be somewhat embarrassed. Han Li discovered that this strange display wasn't noticed by anybody else in the room. Their attention had been captured by Xianxia, who had already sat in the main chair with Lady Fan gracefully poised at his side. Xianxia widely smiled and said, "I am truly honored to have you 13 fellow Taoists participate in this trade meeting. Although there were 2 fellow Taoists that had to leave early, this trade meeting is already the largest one yet. That is about all I have to say. Everyone can now take out their items. Give your items a brief introduction, and then everyone can start bidding or offer an exchange. Accept whatever offer pleases you." He then turned his head to the fat, blue-robed old man and smiled. He was clearly indicating for him to start. As of current, the fat old man was closely embracing the body of a dainty female cultivator. Upon seeing Xianxia's smile, he reluctantly relaxed his grip on her waist and leisurely said, "Since this is the case, I will start. I've brought quite a few good items this time around. I am more than willing to exchange them for any of the materials that I require." After that was said, the old man stood up and placed a storage pouch from his waist onto the table. Numerous items suddenly appeared on the table in a vortex of spinning red light. The spiritual chi that the items emitted appeared significant. 3 heavenly spirit beads, an ambush shark demon core, the hide of an ocean-form beast. The old man gave a proud introduction for each of his items, impressing no small number of the cultivators at the table. It was clear that each of these items were quite rare. Han Li couldn't help but coldly smile at the items. While these items could be considered truly valuable to ordinary core formation cultivators, they were completely unremarkable to him. The rarest item amongst them, the ambusher sharp demon core, was only a grade 6 demon core. Han Li had personally exterminated at least 8 demon beasts of that specific type. When the fat old man finished giving an introduction to his items, he sat back down and once again embraced the dainty woman at his side. He had a face full of arrogance. The chi condensation woman was originally somewhat unwilling to be held by him, but now, her eyes unconsciously glowed with a soft light. After the old man sat down, the person who sat next to him, an eccentric with a red embroidered headband, dryly coughed and unsteadily stood. This person was rather shriveled and appeared as if a stiff breeze would blow him over. "I've only brought 1 item. The beast egg of the grade 5 dark coil worm." He spoke unhurriedly and took out a yellow beast egg from his robes shortly after he finished speaking. It was the size of a chicken egg. Dark coil worm. Once the eccentric had finished speaking, the eyes of the other cultivators brightened, and they rigidly stared at the demon beast egg with fervent gazes. If you enjoy the translation, please consider supporting the novel on Patreon. Every patron counts towards the translation speed goals, no matter how small. I've also started adding future chapters for preview. With enough support, I will be able to translate full-time and release 10+ chapters a week. Chapter 537. Information. Each of the other cultivators took out their items, and as expected, they were each noteworthy and proved valuable to core formation cultivators. It was no wonder that this secret market had such a special meeting. Han Li indifferently glanced at the items being presented. Although the items didn't interest him, they greatly provoked the interest of the other cultivators, heating up the atmosphere in the room. When Han Li's turn came, he casually took out a few rare grade 6 and 7 demon beast materials. Of course, this naturally aroused quite some surprise. Soon, it became the last cultivator's turn, a dark-skinned, middle-aged man. He was among the 3 mid-core formation cultivators at the table. The others gazed at him with a trace of additional respect. At that moment, the person unhurriedly took out 2 items from his storage pouch and casually placed them onto the table with an unchanged expression. There was a palm-sized, pitch-black copper plate, and a half-foot-long piece of grey bone. It appeared to have come from the spine of some animal. The majority of cultivators present blankly stared at the items, unable to make out anything exceptional about them. They all waited for him to give an explanation. But after he took out the items, he astonishingly said, "I will only sell these 2 items to those that recognize them. If you aren't destined for them, do not seek them." He then leaned back against his chair without a care and narrowed his eyes, paying no heed to the beautiful woman close to him, leaving her slightly embarrassed. When the others heard this, they silently looked at each other in dismay. Only Han Li and Xianxia revealed a slight change in expression when they gazed at the items. An odd expression flickered across Han Li's face. Although he was somewhat far from the items, when he swept his immense spiritual sense past them, he was able to clearly tell what they were. Although the bone didn't belong to an ordinary demon beast, it simply didn't catch his interest. However, he was somewhat interested in the copper plate, as there were a few bewildering ancient characters inscribed onto it. The ancient characters were nearly the same as those contained inside the aged hide book of the nameless Qi concealment technique. Could it have something to do with it? Even now, Han Li was incapable of completely understanding the ancient book's contents. Just as Han Li inwardly mulled this over, Xianxia smiled and laughed. After sweeping his gaze over the bones, Xianxia jokingly said, "Ha ha! I didn't expect Brother Sun to be so magnanimous as to bring out the spirit bone of a grade 8 demon beast. I am truly tempted." These words startled everyone present and caused an uproar. The item could be considered the most precious one being displayed. The spirit bone of an existence on the level of a grade 8 demon beast was definitely a bizarre treasure seldom seen by core formation cultivators. When Han Li heard this, his heart stirred. Could this person have any information on grade 8 demon beasts? The cultivator surnamed Sun chuckled upon hearing that Xianxia was able to make out the origins of the bone. After deeply glancing at him, he spoke no further. At that point, the trade meeting became a rather fervent event. Everyone wore an expression of unconcealed excitement. The female cultivator companions also gazed at the items on the table with passionate expressions. When Han Li saw this, he unconsciously turned his head to Xianxia to find that she also wore a passionate expression. It seemed that these items held an undeniable allure regardless of one's status. At that moment, the fat old man started to list out the conditions by which he would trade his items. The heavenly spirit beads can be exchanged for several stalks of medicine herbs aged 500 years and higher. The demon core requires the tendon of a grade 7 demon beast. Of course, I am also willing to trade them for enough spirit stones. And, seeing that everyone managed to bring out precious treasures, the arrogance of the fat old man had mostly dissolved. When he spoke of the tendon, he unconsciously glanced in Han Li's direction as Han Li happened to have one on his side of the table. Unfortunately, Han Li had no interest in a grade 6 demon beast core. He merely continued to sit with Xianxia in his loose embrace. "I do want that grade 6 demon core, but I don't have any spirit tendons. How many spirit stones do you want for it?" A white-haired old man said with much interest. As fellow Daoist knows, demon beasts are far more difficult to come by than they had been in the past. As such, its price will be higher. I will require 15,000 spirit stones for it. The fat old man appeared unwilling to part with it and responded with an obviously high price. When the white-haired old man heard this, he bitterly smiled and said little else. It was clear the high price had dissuaded him. I want that demon core, a white-haired old woman expressionlessly said. Soon after she spoke, a storage pouch flew in the direction of the fat old man. The fat old man received the storage pouch and wore a satisfied expression after inspecting it. Only Lady Qing can be so bold. Us poor cultivators cannot hope to compare. The old man seemed to recognize the woman and tossed the demon beast core over to her with a chuckle. The white-haired old woman coldly snorted and caught the demon beast core. After wordlessly examining it, she placed it into her storage pouch and said nothing further. The other cultivators began to ask about the fat old man's other items, resulting in most of them being traded for. He then put away the remaining items. The following bidding for the red-banded eccentric's dark coil worm egg created a huge contest. Because his conditions were quite lax and he also accepted spirit stones, the demon beast egg was open to everyone. In the end, the beast egg was exchanged for several bottles of precious medicine pills by a red-clothed cultivator with an unremarkable appearance. After another 6 people, it was finally Han Li's turn. Han Li looked at the pile of valuable materials in front of him and felt several burning gazes fall onto him. Among them was the fat old man who particularly desired the spirit tendon. Han Li gently smiled. Without standing, he leaned back into his chair with Wen Xiue in his arm and calmly said, I don't want any items for these materials. I am only willing to exchange them for information. So long as your information is to my satisfaction, I will give all of these materials to you. Information. Han Li's words were cause for surprise. Although they were somewhat shocked, nobody stirred up a fuss. Rather, they all glanced at Han Li with curiosity, calmly waiting to hear what he would say next. Yun Qianxiao's eyes stirred and suspicion flickered across his face. Han Li leisurely asked, Might any of you fellow Taoists know the location of a grade 8 demon beast nest? I wish to use these materials to acquire such information. Grade 8 demon beast. Each person took in a breath of alarm with an expression of great shock. Could it be that fellow Daoist is joking? Do you intend on fighting a grade 8 demon beast? The fat old man wore an incredulous expression. As Han Li tapped the table, he unhurriedly said, Of course not. I am using the information for something else. But I'm not interested in saying what specifically. At the same time, he swept his gaze past the other cultivators without a trace of politeness. They revealed amazement and shock, much to Han Li's disappointment. Han Li's gaze then fell onto the dark-skinned cultivator surnamed Sunday. When Cultivator Sun saw Han Li look at him, he was startled, but soon came to an understanding. He smiled and asked, Could it be that fellow Daoist believes that I have information on a grade 8 demon beast? Unfortunately, fellow Daoist Li is mistaken. He then shook his head. Han Li revealed unconcealed disappointment and deeply sighed. But at that moment, Han Li heard a sweet voice say, I know the location of a grade 8 demon beast, but I don't want the materials. I have a different condition for fellow Daoist Li. Han Li was greatly startled by who had spoken. Han Li incredulously said, You have information on a grade 8 demon beast. The person who had spoken was the woman in his embrace, Wen Xiue. Faintly leaning onto Han Li, Wen Xiue appeared extremely calm as she looked into Han Li's face and said, That's right. I know the approximate location of a grade 8 demon beast nest. Lady Fan wore a look of amazement, but she soon rebuked Wen Xiue with a cold expression. Sir, what nonsense are you spouting? How could you have information on a grade 8 demon beast? Don't speak without thinking. While Han Li was in doubt, he suddenly felt the woman draw closer to him. She firmly said, Marital Aunt Fan. Xiue truly knows the whereabouts of a grade 8 demon beast. I have no intention of deceiving Senior Li. Please, be at ease. If you enjoy the translation, please consider supporting the novel on Patreon. Every patron counts towards the translation speed goals, no matter how small. I've also started adding future chapters for preview. With enough support, I will be able to translate full-time and release 10+ chapters a week. Chapter 538, The Might of New Swords U. Lady Fan frowned and thought to say something when Han Li interrupted her with a serious expression. Wait, I want to hear what she has to say. I will determine whether or not she is telling the truth. Xianxia's eyes coldly glinted. After muttering to himself for a moment, he smiled, saying, "Since Marshal Nice knows something, let fellow Daoist Li ask." With a moment's pause, Lady Fan reluctantly agreed, "Fine. Many thanks." Without any further niceties, Han Li nodded his head and expressed his thanks. Han Li's casual mannerisms caused a faint trace of irritation to appear on Xianxia's face, but it was quickly concealed. At that moment, Han Li stared at Wen Xiue and asked, "You said you know about the nest of a grade 8 demon beast?" Han Li's voice was tranquil, absent of either anger or happiness. This aroused a trace of hesitation in Wen Xiue, who was only a hair's breadth away. But she soon thought of something terrifying and became resolute. She nodded and gave a sincere recollection. "When I first arrived at the Outer Star Seas, I unintentionally acquired a sea map detailing a certain area. I originally believed it to be the location of hidden treasures and stealthily slipped away to take a look. I ended up discovering a young windbreaker beast. Fortunately, the beast was only at grade 3 and was unable to discover me, so I immediately left the location out of fear. Senior should know that windbreaker beasts only give birth once they reach grade 8, and they won't leave their offspring until they reach about grade 5. As such, it is certain that there is a grade 8 demon beast lurking nearby. If Senior is willing to agree to my conditions, I am willing to lead the way." Han Li's expression changed and he revealed a trace of excitement. A fully grown windbreaker beast was a genuine grade 8 demon beast. If this woman spoke the truth, the nest was certain to have the demon echo grass he required. Han Li stared at the woman for a long while before letting out a long breath. With a deep voice, he asked, "What does fellow Daoist desire for the information on the demon beast nest?" Wen Xiue blushed for a moment before unhesitantly saying, "I wish for Senior to take this young woman away from here and take her as your concubine." "What?" Han Li paused for a moment with an expression of surprise on his face. "Xiue, what nonsense are you saying?" When Lady Fan heard her, she was unable to stay sitting as furious surprise appeared on her face. The other cultivators also appeared shocked. But soon after, a majority of the cultivators revealed entertained expressions. A few of them even bantered and couldn't help but chuckle. When Xianxia heard this, his expression grew sullen, and his complexion became ashen. Xianxia slapped his palms against the table and stared at his hands. With a cold voice, he expressionlessly said, "I didn't clearly hear what you wanted from fellow Daoist Li. Let me hear that again." Wen Xue's body trembled several times while in Han Li's embrace, and her face became bloodlessly pale. But when her bright eyes fell onto Han Li's calm expression, she regained a trace of courage, and she shouted with all the strength in her body, I want Senior Li to take me as his concubine and take me away from the exquisite sound sect." Afterwards, she lowered her head, no longer daring to look up. Puff! Xiao's hands were instantly covered in grey flames that were half a foot high. The flames were wild and untamed. Strange grey light shone onto his face, making for a frightening sight. Hollow bone yin flames. Someone uttered. Suddenly, the original laughter and smiles in the room had disappeared, all replaced with solemn expressions. "Fellow Daoist Li. It seems that girl's cultivation has gone awry, and her mind became addled. I hope fellow Daoist doesn't take her drivel to heart. Servants, restrict Wen Xue's magic power and place her in seclusion for half a month." Xiao coldly ordered without the slightest emotion. Just as those orders were spoken, two azure-robed, late Foundation establishment cultivators walked in and headed straight towards Han Li. With an ashen complexion, Wen Xiue looked into Han Li's eyes with a pleading expression and a delicate, heart-wrenching gaze. Han Li couldn't help but frown. "Wait." Without waiting for Xiao to speak, Lady Fan perturbedly said, "What? Does fellow Daoist Li plan on taking in the woman?" Without faltering, Han Li indifferently said, "Perhaps. However, I rather want to know the information on the demon beast. I hope Brother Yun and Madam won't be impatient. How about you wait until after hearing my response?" When Xiao heard this, his expression fluctuated as he muttered to himself for a short moment. He then waved his hands and extinguished the flames. As Xiao emotionlessly stared at Han Li, he uttered, Servants, step down. I will listen to what he has to say. He decided to give Han Li face, as he was a fellow core formation cultivator. After all, there would soon be a great event where he would require the power of all the core formation cultivators present. Thus, he was unwilling to casually offend anybody. Fellow Daoist when took the initiative to willingly become my concubine, but I don't care about that in the slightest. However, I am quite determined to win over her information on the demon beast. Wouldn't it be better if I were to exchange these materials for this woman's freedom? What do you think, Brother Yun? Han Li pushed out the pile of precious materials towards Xianxia and unblinkingly gazed at him with a mysterious smile. You will use these to exchange for her. Xianxia spoke with an ice-cold tone, but his eyes revealed a trace of confusion. The pile before him contained precious materials from grade 6 and 7 demon beasts. It was worth several tens of thousands of spirit stones at the very least, and he was more than willing to accept it in exchange for a foundation establishment cultivator. Even if the woman was an enchanting beauty, it was quite an astonishing affair. Could it be that the information of a grade 8 demon beast was that important to him? Should he use this opportunity to settle the situation, or should he use force to further pressure him? After some further thought, Xianxia quickly came to a conclusion and his expression relaxed. Just as he thought to say something, Lady Fan leaned her seductive body against him and whispered something into his ear. In an instant, Xianxiao's expression changed to reveal hesitation. After a moment of silence, he righteously said, "Fellow Daoist Li, I cannot let you take this girl away, no matter how much you pay. Otherwise, it would set a precedent that will allow the sex female cultivators to be easily taken away by anyone who fancies them. This would greatly tarnish our reputation." These words startled the other cultivators and caused them to look at each other. It was reasonable to say that the pile of precious materials was worth far more than a foundation establishment woman, no matter how beautiful she may be. Hence, there was definitely something amiss with Xianxiao's rejection. With Han Li's unwillingness to release the woman, the others watched the scene with a sneer. They felt the following exchange would prove to be quite entertaining. Exquisite sound sect. Han Li pursed his lips and a strange expression flickered through his eyes. What? Fellow Daoist Li doesn't know that this secret room was opened by the sect. I happen to be an elder of the Exquisite Sound sect. I am assisting sect elder Fan in managing it, Xianxiao coldly said. His face was faintly covered in a layer of strange grey qi, undoubtedly in a display of superior might. Xianxiao's display was but a minor effort at intimidation. Since he is only an early core formation cultivator and he is currently in my territory, he will have to submit after thinking about what there is to gain and lose. It is only a pity about those materials. Xianxiao thought with slight regret. There wasn't a trace of worry in his mind. But at that moment, Han Li suddenly sneered and uttered, "Fine." Much like Xianxiao, Han Li raised his hand, summoning a white light that abruptly flashed before him. Xianxiao was greatly startled and unconsciously circulated his cultivation art, enveloping his body in countless grey flames. At that moment, the white light ruthlessly struck the flames. It underwent a series of blurs and suddenly revealed 12-inch-long swords that all bore into the flames. Xianxiao was stricken with terror and hastily unleashed his magic treasure. However, the flames weren't able to block the 12 flying swords for even an instant. The flames faded away as a dozen bloody holes appeared on Xianxiao's body. By the time Xianxiao had released his small grey pitchfork, he had already fallen to the ground with a miserable scream. When the other cultivators saw this, they became dumbstruck and their mouths were gaping open. They were unable to recollect themselves for quite some time. If you enjoy the translation, please consider supporting the novel on Patreon. Every patron counts towards the translation speed goals, no matter how small. I've also started adding future chapters for preview. With enough support, I will be able to translate full-time and release 10+ chapters a week. Chapter 539. Provoking or Han Li indifferently waved his hand and the 12 small swords converged back into one. It then disappeared into his sleeve with a flash of white light. Han Li lowered his hand and wore a tranquil expression, saying, "Now, let's have a chat." Having been struck down just a moment ago without the slightest resistance or contest, Xianxia had lost the will to fight. After a short moment, Xianxia managed to stand up with his blood-covered body. He glanced at Han Li with a gaze full of fright. With a pale face, Xianxia said, "Well, since I cannot stop you, feel free to take Wensu away. However, let's get the unpleasant matters out of the way first." She already caught the eye of Xianxia and was being prepared as a cultivation vessel. "After you take her away, don't be afraid of any calamities you attract." Soon after, he took out several talismans and slapped them onto his body. With the flashes of green light, his wounds healed at a visible rate. Cultivation vessel. Han Li suddenly realized why Wensu desired to depart. However, Han Li's expression suddenly grew cold from the implicit meaning of Xianxia's words. Han Li said with an unchanged expression, "There is someone else that fancies her? That's no problem. I'll take her anyways. Though, it would be better if fellow Daoist kept his threats to a minimum. Otherwise, blood will be shed if my mood takes a turn for the worse." He then casually swept his gaze across the room. Han Li's threats weren't entirely plausible. If it weren't for the fact that so many core formation cultivators were present, Han Li would have clearly killed a lot of them to tie up all the loose ends. However, he wasn't completely confident in being able to kill them all. As such, he could only use his heavy words to intimidate those that were present. If his previous attack had left the others bewildered, then his current tone had aroused suspicion that Han Li was a nascent soul cultivator. The cultivators present became anxious and they quickly lowered their heads. None dared to meet Han Li's gaze. Xianxiao naturally also thought of this possibility. He appeared to be an early core formation cultivator, but had nearly taken his life with a single strike. Additionally, he wanted to find the nest of a grade 8 demon beast. When he made the connection, he suddenly began to inwardly curse without end. Wensu, still in Han Li's embrace, suddenly widened her beautiful eyes and her body jolted straight. She would rather die than become someone else's cultivation vessel. As a result, she had decided to risk her life in that previous display. However, she completely hadn't expected this cultivator surnamed Li to possess such a frightening cultivation. He was able to suppress all the cultivators present by himself, and in a single terrifying move, he gravely injured Xianxiao and left Lady Fan with a face full of terror. This was all such a delightful surprise. It felt like something that would come out of a dream. Han Li glanced at the other's careful and meek mannerisms and coldly smiled. He then raised his hand and summoned the dark-skinned cultivator's copper plate to his hand. Han Li began to examine it without a trace of politeness. The dark-skinned cultivator's expression faintly changed. However, his mouth trembled several times, only to remain silent. He didn't dare to say any words of dissatisfaction. Since Han Li was able to nearly deal Xianxiao a killing blow in a single strike, he naturally knew that he didn't pose a chance and turned his expression away. Han Li put down the copper plate and indifferently spoke to its owner. "I want this item. How many spirit stones for it?" The dark-skinned cultivator was slightly surprised and instinctively responded, 7. No, 5,000 spirit stones. Han Li then took out a grade 5 demon core and promptly dropped it in front of the other person. "I'll use the demon core to trade for it." Han Li then turned to Lady Fan and said, "Moreover, don't say that I robbed you of this woman. The materials on the table can be considered payment for her." Han Li patted the shoulder of Wensu and let go of her. He then stood up and unhurriedly walked towards the exit. Wensu finally woke up a short moment later and hurried after him in a somewhat flustered manner. Lady Fan's expression stirred and she suddenly yelled, "Senior Li, please slow down." Han Li halted his steps, and he turned around with an odd expression on his face. Han Li found it quite interesting that the woman was actually courageous enough to call out to him. Wensu grew nervous at this and unconsciously drew closer to Han Li. Han Li narrowed his eyes and indifferently asked, "What is it? Does Senior wish to return to the inner star seas? Our exquisite sound sect will have a method of returning everyone to the inner star seas in the near future." Lady Fan sweetly smiled, speaking with an obviously respectful tone. As it was very likely that she was speaking to a nascent soul cultivator, she didn't dare to be negligent. Han Li frowned and asked, What do you mean by that? He wasn't interested in hearing elusive words. Seeing that Han Li was still patient, she didn't dare to put up any pretenses and hastily said, "Our exquisite sound sect is currently preparing a transportation formation to return to the inner star seas. We are currently lacking a few crucial materials. As the formation cannot be completed without them, we hosted this trade meeting in the hopes of acquiring everyone's assistance. So long as you assist in the creation of the transportation formation, our exquisite sound sect will send you back to the inner star seas free of charge." Lady Fan's words caused the other core formation cultivators to become restless. A majority of them revealed pleasant surprise. The outer star seas had already become the dominion of demon beasts. They couldn't stay here for much longer. As such, they had naturally thought of returning. However, there were no transportation formations, and it would take more than 600 years to return at the speed of their flight, not to mention the many dangers they would encounter along the way. They remained here only out of an inability to leave. The white-haired old woman's expression stirred and she coldly asked, "Even with the transportation formation, won't we need displacement talismans? Don't tell us that the exquisite sound sect has already grasped how to refine them." "Senior, please don't be worried. Although our exquisite sound sect cannot refine these talismans, we acquired quite a few of them before the beast torrent. We currently have more than enough to send everyone back to the scattered star seas. The most important material for the formation is phantasm stone. It is truly rare. Although we found a deposit of this stone during our search for it over these past few years, it happens to be located near the resting area of a group of high-grade demon beasts. A majority of them are at grade 5 and 6, and they are great in number. It isn't something that can be done with a small number of cultivators. Moreover, if any of them are allowed to escape, they will alert higher-grade demon beasts, resulting in disaster. Thus, our sect requires everyone's strength." Lady Fan spoke with a righteous expression. After hearing this, the others wore a pensive expression. Cleanly exterminating a group of demon beasts wasn't something that could be easily agreed to. They had to carefully think about it. The dark-skinned cultivator muttered to himself for a moment before slowly asking, "Why didn't you ask a nascent soul cultivator for assistance instead of core formation cultivators? The certainty of success would have been higher." "Do you fellow Taoists think that I didn't try?" However, most of those venerable seniors had completely vanished after the beast torrent. I was only able to get into contact with Senior Swift Crane. With that person joining us, we would have been able to deal with the grade 7 demon beasts. He was the one who fancied Xianxia to be his cultivation vessel. Lady Fan bitterly smiled and glanced in Han Li's direction. When the other cultivators heard this, they looked at each other in dismay. When Han Li heard this, he rubbed his chin and muttered to himself for a moment. He then promptly said, "I have no interest in this endeavor. Deal with it yourselves." With that said, he ignored them and headed out. When Xianxia didn't dare to fall behind and quickly followed after him. Nobody dared to block Han Li. They could only gaze after him as he left. Lady Fan wore an expression of unconcealed disappointment. As for Xianxia, he finally began to speak once more. "Since fellow Daoist Li is unwilling to assist us, we won't force any of you either. We will now introduce some information on the demon beasts nearby the Phantasm Stone. Please come to your own decisions after the details have been explained." Here, as if he hadn't been heavily injured, Xianxia began to ceaselessly speak. "Senior, do you truly not wish to return to the inner star seas?" When Xianxia muttered from behind Han Li. Without turning his head around, Han Li aloofly replied, "Why? Do you want to return?" "I also don't wish to, it's just..." When Xianxia's voice grew soft until she ceased speaking. At that moment, Han Li had already brought her past the stone wall. Since his objective had already been accomplished, he naturally had no interest in staying here any longer. Han Li brought when Xianxia outside of the concealed city, much to the astonishment of the old gatekeeper. He then wrapped the woman in his light and took off into the skies. When Xianxia was silent as they flew, and didn't ask him any questions about their destination. It seemed she was leaving everything entirely up to Han Li. Han Li also hadn't thought to give her any further explanation and continued to fly in stifled silence. 2 days later, Han Li eventually found a desolate island with meager spiritual qi and descended. If you enjoy the translation, please consider supporting the novel on Patreon. Every patron counts towards the translation speed goals, no matter how small. I've also started adding future chapters for preview. With enough support, I will be able to translate full-time and release 10+ chapters a week. Chapter 540. Concubine. The island had several mountains that rose above 300 meters, and were lush with verdant forestry and filled with many trees. Han Li circled around the mountains before descending onto one of them with Wen Xiue in tow. Under the woman's astonished gaze, Han Li released his flying swords and carved a small cave residence into the mountain after a few hours. Although the cave residence was less than half the size of his cave residence in the Misty Island and was far more crude, it still had a bedroom and seclusion room, along with a tool refinement room, medicinal garden, and so on. Han Li appeared quite satisfied and placed down several formation spells around it before bringing Wen Xiue inside. Han Li brought Wen Xiue into the bedroom and sat on a hurriedly carved stone chair. After examining the woman, he leisurely said, "You will be living here from now on. I will tell you the incantations for the spell formations. This place is quite secluded. If you diligently cultivate, there is a chance you'll enter core formation." "Many thanks, Senior Li." Wen Xiue blushed underneath Han Li's gaze, appearing to be at a complete loss about what to do. Han Li smiled. "Senior Li." Wen Xiue hastily hung her pretty head and hesitantly said, "Sorry. Should I call you?" Having just become his concubine, she didn't know how she should address him. Han Li rubbed his nose and indifferently said, "You can call me Mr. Li." Han Li had yet to reveal his true appearance. He had still assumed the form of a middle-aged man. After a moment of hesitation, Wen Xiue obediently replied, "Yes, Mr. Li." Han Li nodded his head with satisfaction and thought about what he should say. He then softly asked, "When did fellow Daoist arrive at the Scattered Star Seas, and how did Lady Fan become the Exquisite Sound sect leader? According to my knowledge, Fairy Violet Spirit should have been the sect leader." "Yi." Mr. Li seems quite knowledgeable of the sect's past. Wen Xiue was quite amazed that Han Li had made inquiries about the Exquisite Sound sect instead of hurriedly asking about the Demon Beast Nest. But after some thought, she opened her almond lips and explained, "The Exquisite Sound sect was entirely managed by the young sect master before we teleported to the Outer Star Seas. But while she was out at Heaven Void Hall, a startling change occurred when we returned to the sect. The envoy of the left disappeared without a trace and all of the power in the sect fell into the hands of an outsider and the envoy of the right, Lady Fan. I later discovered that this cultivator was a Devil Dao cultivator and that the Exquisite Sound sect had already become a vassal of the Devil Dao. In order to establish herself as sect master, Lady Fan immediately gathered together a large number of disciples and sent us through Heavenly Star City's transportation formation. At the time, I had been coerced into traveling along. Since then, our sect has handled this hidden city. The disloyal female disciples have been mysteriously disappearing over the past few years, and those that have been given away were never seen again. Were it not for Mr. Li saving my life earlier, I fear I would have become a cultivation vessel." Wen Xiue dimly said. Han Li's expression stirred. Hiding his intentions, he asked, "What did your sect master Fan do in the Outer Star Seas? It can't be that she only managed the hidden city." "I'm not too sure about this. However, Lady Fan and that Devil Dao cultivator surnamed June were gathering all sorts of information with the assistance of the hidden city as if they were looking for something." Wen Xiue spoke with uncertainty and an expression of doubt appeared on her face. When Han Li heard this, he ceased asking questions and started to mull over what she had said. It seemed a violent usurpation had occurred while he and Fairy Violet Spirit were trapped in Heaven Void Hall. With the successful usurpation of power, Lady Fan immediately brought large quantities of disciples to Wondrous Depths Island. Afterwards, the Starfall Coalition had launched an attack on Heavenly Star City. It seemed that regardless of how the Devil Dao took over the Exquisite Sound sect, it was clear that the influence of the Starfall Coalition was immense. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to take over the sect at such an opportune time. By the time Fairy Violet Spirit returned from Heaven Void Hall, she would have discovered that her sect was gone. As for the Devil Dao powers, They were drawing support from the exquisite sound sect to find someone or something in the outer star seas. This was yet another mysterious aspect that had nothing to do with Han Li. Hence, he was disinclined to further ask about it. Furthermore, he had already become irreconcilable enemies with Daoist Master Swift Crane, and it seemed the current exquisite sound sect had a relationship with him. As such, Han Li was even more unwilling to be tied down by them and had refused Lady Fan's proposal. As for returning to the inner star seas, Han Li wasn't even considering the matter until after he broke through his bottleneck. While it was true that demon beasts were running amok in this land, with the greatly desired Heaven Void Cauldron in his hands, the inner star seas might not necessarily be safer. Han Li repeatedly mulled over Wen Xiu's words in his mind after a short moment. He found nothing that sounded incorrect. To the best of his knowledge, she was telling the truth. It was only natural for Han Li to be this careful, as he possessed the famed Heaven Void Cauldron. Who knows how many nascent soul eccentrics wanted to lay their hands on it? Even since ancient times, countless men had suffered from the wily tricks of beautiful women. Han Li didn't wish to become one of them out of a moment of carelessness. But of course, the odds of this woman attempting to deceive him were next to nothing. He had suddenly appeared before her as a person that nobody recognized and brought her to an unknown place. He was also under the effect of a secret technique that even early nascent soul cultivators couldn't see through. At that moment, when Xiue saw Han Li's expression fluctuate, and she unconsciously revealed a trace of restlessness. Having finally collected his thoughts, Han Li noticed the beautiful woman's peculiarity. He faintly smiled and said, "I've already brought you away from the hidden city, and I've even arranged this location for you. How about you tell me about the location of the demon beast nest? After you tell me, I'll immediately head off and you'll never see me again." Wen Xiue blankly stared for a moment before revealing surprise, "Senior doesn't intend on taking me in as a concubine." Han Li calmly said, "I am used to traveling alone. I don't need anybody following after me." After a moment of silence, her beautiful face wore a complicated expression and she gently shook her head. After a strange emotion flickered within her eyes, she serenely said, "Many thanks for Mr. Li's kindness. But since I've already decided to become your concubine, I don't have any thoughts of reneging on it. Senior, please be at ease. Xiue will keep her promise without complaint." Han Li clearly understood the woman's apprehension, and he couldn't help but mysterious smile, saying, "I don't know what fellow Daoist Wen intends, but my words hold firm. If fellow Daoist truly wishes to settle the matter and become my wife, I won't further decline. When that happens, fellow Daoist Wen had better not regret it." He was certain that Wen Xiue didn't want to become anybody's concubine. The conditions raised in the hidden city were most likely raised out of helplessness. Although being a concubine was far better than being a cultivation vessel, there weren't any foundation establishment woman that would be willing to become someone else's concubine. This only happened in desperate circumstances or under coercion. Although Han Li felt quite tempted by Wen Xiue's exceptional beauty, he clearly understood that he was at a crucial point in his cultivation. He couldn't afford to keep a foundation establishment woman by his side. It would be far better to let her go free and drop the subject. Doubts began to surface after Han Li explained his words. Hesitation appeared on her face. A trace of amusement appeared within his eyes. Han Li softly said, "What? Don't tell me that fellow Daoist still wishes to become my concubine." "No." Wen Xiu's hurriedly refused, and after a moment's pause, she bit her lip and saluted Han Li, saying, I must give many thanks to Mr. Li. Junior Wen Xiue will never forget your kindness." Her expression was filled with anxious fright. "Since that is the case, let's drop the matter of being a concubine. There is no need for fellow Daoist Wen to take it seriously." Han Li had no intentions of deliberately making this difficult. "Many thanks, Mr. Li." Wen Xiue was joyfully surprised. Her expression relaxed and her flowery beauty blossomed, producing an emotionally stirring scene. Upon seeing this, Han Li felt a ripple of emotion, but he quickly buried this emotion at the bottom of his heart. After calming himself, Han Li serenely asked, "Fellow Daoist Wen, how about telling me about the Windbreaker beast?" Wen Xiue's smile disappeared. She said with a worried tone, "Mr. Li, the Windbreaker beast's nest is somewhat dangerous. It is near the edge of the depths. Please clearly consider it for a moment before heading out to the nest. The edge of the depths. Han Li frowned. It seemed this would prove quite troublesome. The current depths were beyond dangerous. If you enjoy the translation, please consider supporting the novel on Patreon. Every patron counts towards the translation speed goals, no matter how small. I've also started adding future chapters for preview. With enough support, I will be able to translate full-time and release 10+ chapters a week.